They did not kill him quickly. A jolt ran through Mithridates of Pergamon's body as the chariot lurched forward. Ropes bit savagely into his limbs. In an instant, he was yanked off his feet, face smacking the unforgiving stone road. His scream was lost in the thunder of wheels and hooves as his body was dragged through the dust and blood. This was no swift execution. It was a carefully orchestrated spectacle of agony. That mangled figure tied behind the racing chariot had once been a prince and an ally of Rome. Mithridates of Pergamon was no ordinary victim. He had been celebrated for coming to Julius Caesar's aid and was even rewarded with a king's crown. Yet now, he was suffering one of the most brutal punishments in Roman history. How did a friend of Caesar end up literally torn apart by Rome's wrath? To find out, we must step back to the beginning of his downfall. Just a few years earlier, Mithridates' star was rising. He was born the illegitimate son of the infamous Mithridates the Great of Pontus, giving him royal blood and an iron will. In 47 BC, Julius Caesar found himself in desperate straits, trapped and under siege in Alexandria. Mithridates of Pergamon answered Caesar's frantic call for help. He marched across the Middle East at the head of an army, fighting his way to Egypt. In fierce battles on the Nile, Mithridates helped save Caesar, crushing the forces of Pharaoh Ptolemy XIII. Caesar, grateful for this critical rescue, rewarded the young warrior lavishly. In the aftermath of Caesar's victory at Zela, he placed a crown on Mithridates' head, making him king of the distant Bosporan kingdom by the Black Sea. That kingdom, however, came at a price. Mithridates was now a stranger ruling a far-off land. The Bosporan throne had belonged to others before him, most notably to Asander, a local warlord who had expected to rule. Asander was married to Mithridates' own niece and had been left in charge until Caesar replaced him. Caesar's decision to favor Mithridates ignited a seething grudge. Many in the region saw Mithridates as a Roman puppet, an outsider propped up by foreign legions. While Caesar lived, his new king was safe. The might of Rome's greatest general stood behind him, but everyone knew the situation was volatile. Old rivals like Asander waited patiently, nursing their resentment and watching for any sign of Roman weakness. In 44 BC, that weakness came. Julius Caesar was assassinated in Rome, stabbed to death in the Senate. Overnight, Mithridates lost his powerful patron and protector. The Roman world was plunged into chaos as Caesar's allies and enemies erupted into civil war. In the east, alliances shifted like sand. Suddenly, Mithridates of Pergamon, a man who owed everything to Caesar, found himself very alone. To the new Roman power brokers, he was expendable, just another regional king whose loyalty was uncertain. Rome's Senate had little interest in honoring Caesar's promises, and to Asander, this was the moment long awaited. The crime of Mithridates, in the eyes of his enemies, was simply that he held a throne they felt he didn't deserve. Asander moved quickly. He rallied his forces and supporters, proclaiming himself the true ruler of the Bosporus. Some say he even reached out to Caesar's assassins or other Roman officials, positioning himself as a more reliable ally. Whether or not Rome explicitly sanctioned it, no legions came to save Mithridates when Asander launched his rebellion. The Bosporan kingdom became a battlefield. Mithridates fought desperately to keep his crown. He had tasted power and wasn't about to surrender it without a fight. Skirmishes and sieges raged along the Crimean coast. The air was thick with the smoke of burning villages and the dread of impending doom. But this was not enough to seal his fate, until one act changed everything. Caesar's death had removed any hope of rescue, and Mithridates' forces began to falter. In a decisive clash outside the capital city, Asander's army overwhelmed the loyalists. Mithridates was finally captured, betrayed and bound in chains. The moment he fell into his enemy's hands, his fate was sealed. there would be no mercy. Lysander wanted not just victory, but vengeance, a statement to all who had defied him and to the wider world of Rome. The pretender king would die in unimaginable pain. They dragged the defeated Mithridates before a jeering assembly of soldiers and local citizens. There was no formal trial. His guilt had been decided on the battlefield. Stripped of his royal regalia and bruised from combat, he stood battered and proud, knowing what kind of end likely awaited him. The punishment decreed for him was straight out of nightmares and ancient legend. At dawn, Lysander prepared a spectacle of execution that people would shudder to remember. They would make Mithridates' death echo the myths of Troy themselves. Achilles, in Homer's epic, had dragged Hector's corpse behind his chariot out of vengeful rage. But that was a dead man. Now, the executioners intended to drag a living man to pieces as the ultimate show of dominance. Mithridates' arms were yanked behind his back and tied with thick rope. His ankles were lashed together and fastened by a long rope to the rear of a heavy war chariot. Some accounts say he was stripped naked, his royal purple robes torn off, leaving him shivering in the morning cold and utterly humiliated. The wheels of the chariot were caked in mud and pebbles from the road. Soon they would be caked in blood. A tense hush fell over the gathered crowd. Soldiers stood at attention, and townsfolk craned their necks, both horrified and morbidly curious. Mithridates, battered but defiant, refused to beg. He locked his gaze on the horizon, perhaps praying for a quick end. With a crack of a whip, the horses jolted forward. At first they trotted, pulling Mithridates along on unsteady legs. He stumbled, desperately trying to stay upright and keep pace, his bound arms flailing for balance. But within seconds, the pace quickened. The chariot broke into a canter, and Mithridates lost his footing. He fell hard, face first. His body hit the stones with a sickening thud. Gasps rippled through the crowd as he was suddenly wrenched off the ground and dragged. The chariot driver spurred the horses faster. Now Mithridates was bouncing and sliding across the rough road. His scream of pain cut through the air until a harsh impact silenced it into a choking gasp. His chest and face were ground against gravel and cobbles. Skin shredded away, bright blood smeared the path. Every jolt of the wheels sent a new crack of bone echoing off the city walls. Onlookers could hear his body scraping, an awful wet, grinding sound over the pounding hooves. Mithridates' once handsome face was unrecognizable, scoured by stone and dirt, his mouth filling with dust and blood so that even if he tried to scream again, he could only cough up gore. But that was just the beginning of his torment. Lysander had ordered the chariot to circle the city walls, making sure as many people as possible witnessed the pretender's ghastly fate. The horses accelerated into a full gallop. The driver deliberately swerved close to the stone ramparts, causing Mithridates' flailing body to slam against the wall at corners. The crowd's initial murmurs turned to cries of horror. Some covered their eyes. Others could not look away from the unfolding nightmare. Dragged at breakneck speed, Mithridates' limp form left a trail of blood and tissue in its wake. Incredibly, he was still alive for a time, enduring agony beyond comprehension. When the chariot finally completed its first circuit and slowed, a few observers thought it was over. Mithridates' body was a bloody ruin, but in that mangled heap there was still movement, a feeble twitch of a limb, a gasp for air. The executioners did not stop. They only paused long enough to ensure every spectator saw the price of defying Rome's chosen king. Then came the final stretch. With a shouted command, the horses surged forward once more, this time urged to an even faster sprint. The chariot leapt ahead, yanking Mithridates' broken body like a rag doll behind it. In this last horrific dash, the limits of flesh and bone were reached. A grisly snap rang out as one of his arms was torn clean from its socket, unable to withstand the force. A splash of blood hit the side of a vendor's stall, prompting shrieks from those nearby. Piece by piece, the man who had been a king was coming apart. Finally, mercifully, what remained of Mithridates slammed into the ground and moved no more. He was dead, his lifeless carcass shredded and scattered along the road. When the chariot dragged the corpse back to the starting point and rolled to a halt, a stunned silence fell. What was left of Mithridates was scarcely human. Blood-soaked ropes now held only chunks of torn flesh and shattered bone. For a heartbeat, no one spoke or moved. Then, a section of the crowd erupted in cheers, a grotesque cheer for the fall of a hated usurper and a show of loyalty to the victor. Others in the crowd stood pale and trembling, unable to process the sheer cruelty they had just witnessed. Even some hardened soldiers averted their eyes, swallowing back nausea. Mithridates' remains were unceremoniously untied and dumped in the dirt. There would be no royal funeral, no rites of burial. His body, or what remained of it, was left exposed to be picked apart by stray dogs and carrion birds. It was a final insult, ensuring his soul would find no peace according to the beliefs of the time. In the aftermath, Asander had his revenge and his throne secured through terror. The gruesome execution sent a message louder than any proclamation. This is what becomes of those who challenge Rome's order, or the man who now ruled with Rome's blessing. Word of Mithridates' appalling fate spread quickly through the ports and trading posts of the Black Sea. Traders, travelers, and trembling messengers carried the tale to distant lands. In taverns from Greece to Syria, people spoke in hushed voices of the king who was dragged to death behind a chariot. Fear gripped the region. Any lingering supporters of Mithridates, if there were any left alive, melted away into silence. No one dared to raise a hand against Asander after seeing what happened to his rival. The Bosporan kingdom remained firmly under Asander's control, and in time even Rome's new emperor, Augustus, formally recognized him as the rightful king. By all accounts, the savage punishment achieved its purpose: total intimidation. Not a single rebellion or pretender troubled Asander for the rest of his long reign. Yet the horror of that day also left a scar on the collective memory. Parents would whisper warnings to disobedient children about the terrible fate of Mithridates. Future rebels, if any emerged, surely thought twice, picturing the awful image of a once proud man reduced to meat and dust under a chariot's wheels. Rome, for its part, demonstrated to all its client kingdoms that aiding her might win you a throne, but it could be snatched away in the bloodiest manner if fortunes turned. Mithridates' death became a cautionary tale of the fickleness of Roman favor and the extremes of Roman and Roman-backed cruelty. His story forces us to confront the brutal reality of power in the ancient world. Mithridates of Pergamon lived by Rome's grace and died by Rome's cruelty. In a world ruled by fear and might, justice was often an afterthought. One day he was a hero who saved Caesar. The next he was labeled a criminal and given a death befitting the worst of traitors. Was this the price of ambition? The price of trusting in the goodwill of an ever-shifting empire? His fate invites a haunting question. If you lived under such perilous circumstances, would you have dared to seize power as he did, knowing that failure could mean being literally torn to pieces? Would you have had the courage to stand in his place? Or would the fear of Rome's wrath have kept you kneeling? Thank you for watching and immersing yourself in this dark chapter of history. How does this story make you feel? Do you think Mithridates deserved such a punishment, or was it a senseless act of cruelty? Let me know your thoughts and reactions in the comments. I'm very interested to hear how you interpret this grim tale of power and retribution. And if you thought this was horrifying, just wait until you hear our next story. In the upcoming episode, we'll delve into the fate of a man whose intestines were pulled out while he was still alive. A punishment even more nightmarish. Make sure to subscribe and stay tuned for that, because the darkest stories of history are often the most compelling. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.